Bailey store in Phalape, better known as Korabili, has stood since 1896. One of the first stores in the Kgamangwato, Bibirwa and Tswapong area, and the only one remaining from the many that was set up by European traders over 100 years ago. I'm standing in front of R.A. Bailey Pty Limited in Phalape, better known as Korabili to many Batswana. I always say, if a name has been Tswanalized, it shows the true measure of its appropriation. This store is one of the first ever in the Kgamangwato, Tswapong and Bibirwa area, and is the last remaining example of the many that were set up by European traders over 100 years ago. It has stood here before even Serowe was established. The year on the storefront, if you can read it, reads 1896. And tonight we're given a glimpse of its rich history and given some insight into its monumental staying power by the store's current owner, Mr. Hilton Charles Freeman. Welcome back to First Issues as we continue our look at the remarkable stories of Bailey's Pty Limited in Phalape. Bailey store in Phalape, better known as Korabili, has stood since 1896. One of the first stores in the Kgamangwato, Bibirwa and Tswapong area, and the only one remaining from the many that was set up by European traders over 100 years ago. We visited Mr. Freeman in his office within the store to find out how it is the Freeman's paths came to cross with that of the original founder, R.A. Bailey himself.
I don't know much about R.A. Bailey before he was a trader. I only know he originally came from the United Kingdom, where many of the traders originated from, you know. That's where he originally came from. Well, R.A. Bailey was actually based at Old Palopi. You know where Old Palopi is, out at Malacca. In R.A. Bailey's store, he traded out at Old Palopi. There were many traders out at Old Palopi. And when Rhodes put the railway line, when the railway line was, you know, they expropriated the land and Rhodes pushed the railway line through to open Rhodesia. And at that time, when the railway line went through here, Khama brought the tribe, brought the people from Old Palopi to Palopi. And there wasn't enough water here, so Khama took most of the tribe to establish Sarui. So Sarui is actually established after Palopi. And R.A. Bailey stayed here. And he opened up, he traded here as R.A. Bailey as he was out at Old Palopi. There were many other European traders out there too. I mean, there were Blackbeards, who are, you know, they're Blackbeards in Sarui now. There's a Blackbeard who's Botswana's ambassador in London. And relations of theirs were also traders out at Old Palopi. And Bailey stayed here. And he traded here until, well, my uncle came here in about somewhere around after the 1920s, when he read an advert in a newspaper, the Diamond Fields Advertiser. He was actually in Kimberley, and he answered a advert there from Bailey to come and work here for him. And he came and joined Bailey here, and he actually bought Bailey out eventually. And that's how the Freeman came in to be in it. The stores eventually got opened up, but that was after R.A. Bailey had gone by my uncle. There were stores opened up at Litlakani, at Rakops, Makalamabedi, Maun, and Gweta. And there was also stores opened up around here at Makapinyan and Ratolo. and also we had stores in Sarui as well. The stores today, those stores, the original Litlakani store is in the museum in Sarui. That's the Litlakani store, and the Gweta store is now used as an office at a lodge just outside Gweta there now. And the original store in Maun is in the Nhabi Museum in Maun. And the original store at Makalamabedi is in the museum in Gaborone. They were all corrugated iron buildings, you see, old stores. Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about how you came to own Bailey's stores? Were you born and bred here? Were you raised watching the store operate?
My uncle, when he took over this business from R.A. Bailey, my father was then in Kimberley at De Beers. He worked for De Beers. He was a fitter and turner at De Beers in Kimberley, you know, the big diamond people. And my uncle got hold of my father, and he told my father's name was Charlie, and he said to him, "Oh, Charlie, you must come up here now, you know, I own Bailey's now, and you must come up here and help me." So my father came up from Kimberley, and he joined my uncle here. And together they worked up here, and eventually my uncle retired. I can't remember what year that was, but he retired and he went and lived in Joburg because he loved horse racing. So he went to live in Joburg, and my father continued here. And I eventually came back here and to help him. I took over from him. He died here and he's buried here. My father, when I came back, he expected me to come back here and help him. And I always wanted to because I liked this country. I wanted to come back. I actually went to school in South Africa, but as a 9-year-old boy, I used to catch the train all the way to Cape Town from here. And when I finished, and my father expected me to come back here, and I wanted to come back here because it was a good life here, you know. I used to be able to hunt here. I used to like hunting. We used to go hunting in the Okavanga, you know. I knew Maun well, I knew the Okavanga well. And I liked the life. The life was good. It was a wild life, you know. There weren't a lot of people. There were no goombas and dancing and that sort of thing. And I always wanted to come back here, and I've never regretted coming back here. You see, I served on the Botswana's National Development Bank for about 15 years. I was one of the first government directors appointed by Seretse. As you know, when De Beers, when the Botswana government bought over 50% of De Beers and became a 50% shareholder with De Beers, the two sides, the government side had 6 directors, and the De Beers side had 6 directors. And I was one of the first government directors on De Beers, appointed by Seretse.
Mm. So why not rename it Freeman's? Why keep Bailey's? Was it because you knew the people already had a...
Well, it had the name Bailey's. Bailey's is just like Haskins.
No need to change.
There's no more Haskinses left in Haskins, and as far as I know, but the name, you can't change names like that. It would be like changing the name of De Beers.
Welcome back to First Issues as we continue our look at the remarkable stories of Bailey's Pty Limited in Phalape. Bailey Store in Phalape, better known as Kogabili, has stood since 1896. This store is one of the first ever in the Khammangwato, Tswapong and Bubirwa area and is the last remaining example of the many that were set up by European traders over 100 years ago. The availability of goods and indeed the lifestyle and needs of Botswana have changed dramatically since the 1800s, as even our guest elaborates when comparing the initial business of Bailey's stores with its operations in 2016.
Botswana has gone ahead enormously. I mean, you know, at independence there was no diamonds, there was nothing. Botswana was a poor country. People have forgotten that the only foreign exchange earner of this country was cattle. It's the only thing they had. And since then the cattle industry has been neglected a bit because there's many other things. They've got diamonds, they've got copper now, although those minerals are going through tough times at the moment. But Botswana didn't only have cattle now. I mean, Botswana became a wealthy country when the diamonds have made it wealthy. I mean, the biggest diamond mine in the world is Jwaneng. Well, you must remember in those days, you know, there was no money easily circulated. There was no big government employment or anything, you know. I'm talking about the colonial days too. The traders were the ones that circulated the money because the main business of the traders, they had trading stores in which they sold blankets, shirts, clothing, staple foods, you know. You didn't get all the tin stuff there were then, milli meal and that sort of stuff. And but one of the biggest businesses at these stores was the buying of cattle. I mean, we used to buy cattle at Litlakani, we used to buy cattle at Rakops, Mound. We used to buy hundreds of head of cattle. And in that way, and we used to pay cash for the cattle, and by that way, the people got money to buy goods, because there was very little government employment, there was no other employment. And that's the only way they got money to buy, you know. And every year, once a year, the cattle used to get moved, used to be driven down to the railhead. And originally, before BMC was built, the cattle were trucked to Johannesburg, to Newtown Market in Joburg to be slaughtered. And it was only after BMC was built, and about BMC, the Botswana Meat Commission, it wasn't called the Botswana Meat Commission then. It was called the Botswana Protectorate Abattoirs, and that was built by the colonial government in about 1964. And only then could cattle get slaughtered there. But at that time, cattle from the Ngami land, as you know, they've always been a problem because of foot and mouth. But those cattle used to be slaughtered, used to be taken all the way to Kazangula, walked, of which I did trips on those. They used to be taken all the way up the cattle route to Kazangula. And from Kazangula, they were crossed over the Zambezi, and they were sold to the Northern Rhodesian Coal Storage Commission. Before that became Zambia. So that's how those cattle got rid of. And it was traders who actually gave the people money to the purchase of cattle, gave them money to buy goods.
Hilton Freeman has served cattle people for decades, and as a farmer himself, his passion for the cattle industry is evident as we continue to speak. He tells us why he says the cattle industry has now become neglected, comparing it with days gone by when small subsistence farmers would fill kraals such as this one just a walk away from Bailey's store with their livestock for transportation by rail, and where he as a young man would help herd 700 heads of cattle to Kazungula by foot in a journey that would take 5 to 6 weeks.
The BMC was built by the colonial government, you know, and it wasn't built for big ranches. The BMC was built for small people. And I can remember every day of the week from Monday to Friday, 10 to 15 bogies. A bogie was a cattle truck which could take, depending on the size, it could take 13 or 14 on each side of the bogie. It either had 26 head in it or 28. Of those 26 and 28, there could be 12 owners. They used to truck here, and you had Grobler, De Toy and McGaw, Pickles, would paint mark all these cattle that went into the trucks, and on their way they went. They were slaughtered, taken to Labatsi by train, and these cattle used to be loaded all the way along here. Cerulli, Radasili, Mahalapi, cattle were loaded, Dabiti, Artesia, and cattle were taken through by rail, by truck. And they were slaughtered. There was always, cattle were unloaded day and day, and they were slaughtered. And within 10 days, the Czechs were back here in Palapi, or wherever they went. They were back in Mahalapi or at Radasili, and the people picked up their checks and they could go off and cash them when they liked. But that's all changed now. To get cattle to BMC now, you've got to use road motor transport. But when you send cattle to BMC now, there's huge delays in paying. They take a long time to pay people. I mean, in recent years, BMC goes and buys in Raakop sometimes. And they buy cattle from the people in Raakops. And they pay them there with a check. But there's no banking facilities in Raakops, but yet they'll pay with a Standard Bank check. And our store in Raakops, we help them there. We cash these checks for the people. And we've had even some of those checks, not many, but now and again we have some of those BMC checks returned RD from the bank. And so they buy and pay with these checks, and the people, if a check comes back, these people are now they go off to these cattle posts and you can never find them again. Once checks come back RD, but that BMC do replace them as soon as you've had one, but it doesn't happen often like that. But there's long delays in paying producers now. And I don't know why that is. It shouldn't be like that. It never used to be like that. But I hope if they hear that, won't bounce on me for saying it's wrong, but it isn't wrong. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with the BMCs at the moment.
Bailey Store in Palape, better known as Kogabili, has stood since 1896. How is it that Mabati a Kogabili have managed to remain open for over a century when many others then and now have failed? What is the secret to their outstanding longevity?
Yeah, well, it's the same as Haskins, you see. Haskins is also 100 years old, and the name, it's the name that's still, people know the name, there's often people come in here, and like the other day an old man walked in here and he wanted a Sterling clothing. They know Sterling, we stock Sterling. I don't know if you know Sterling clothing. It's a very, very well-known brand of men's clothing. And he wanted a Sterling khaki suit, which he could only get from us. We didn't have one. As I said, no, that's fine, we'll order it, it'll come. It's come, actually, it's just come. It's lying there now, but he hasn't come in to pick it up. So they know what they can buy in these stores. Bailey's been going for so long that people know the name Bailey's. Just like with Haskins, they know Haskins, they know the name. And there are few that have been around as long as that, you see. Lots of the old traders have gone now. You've got to be dedicated. You know, when we ran those stores in the early days, you know, it took a whole day to get to Litlakani from here. And that's not so long ago. People don't know that, young people, that if you went from here to Sarui, it was dirt all the way. And Litlakani took all day to get to Litlakani, through the heavy roads, just tracks, no tarred roads. People today don't even know that. They ride on tar, it takes them 2 hours to Litlakani, 5 hours to Maun. Maun was a 2-day trip. Didn't matter which way you went, if you went round Francistown or through here. You slept somewhere on the road.
You couldn't make it in a day
No,
that.
no, you couldn't. When I first used to go down to Gaborone for meetings and that, it was dirt all the way to Labatsi.
Do you have any words of advice for people running business in this day and age?
If you're in business, you must remember the money in the safe is not yours. It belongs to a business. You must pay yourself a wage out of the business. You mustn't help yourself to the money in the safe. Many people think the money that comes in is for their spending. But if you've got accounts to pay, a lot of that money belongs to your creditors. You can't just help yourself to it. That's how lots of businesses collapse. Because you end up then with creditors wanting to sue you and that sort of thing. You've got to look after the money, because if you get credit, like we do from all these companies, you've only got that credit because they now trust you. You've got to build a trust up with your suppliers so that they'll give you credit. If you haven't got that trust, it's cash only. Well, difficult times, you've got to buy less. You can't just buy if times are hard. You've got to cut down your buying. And make sure you pay your accounts. Your creditors also have tough times.
And is it your intention to keep the store going for many more decades to come? What's the plan there?
Well, my son is here now. Andrew, he's here now. My daughter's running one of our farms in Labatsi. She's a vet. And we've got farms on the Tuli block, so Andrew I'm now getting old now. And he will hopefully keep it going. Although he's already talked of selling some of the stores, we've sold some of them.
What a lovely story. And although our conversation with Bailey Store ends right here, we hope to see their doors remain open for years to come. Until next week and another issue of interest, I, Namezo Semakula, the team behind First Issues, and our sponsors, First National Bank, wish you a good night and pleasant viewing.